Welcome to the Vylos Thought Leadership. My name is Hassan Ghiassi, and I'm here with my co-founder, David Grimm. And this week, for us, we had some costs that increased, specifically around a few services that we have. And it comes up quite a lot with folks that we're working with, and it's this ballooning of costs that are happening. The fact that prices are going up on different products. They might be working good, technology or automations that are going good, and now these companies have a challenge because things are running, but the costs are also running up and up and up, and companies don't necessarily know when they will go even higher. And so in these series, I always try to take the learner's mindset, and I'm going to be asking questions, and David will be our expert here. He's smarter than me anyway, so it's a natural fit. So David, I have a question for you because there's a lot happening in AI, but what do you normally tell companies that have this challenge where things are running well, but their costs are kind of unstable? They're going to keep increasing.
Yeah, it's more or less the same story over again, which we see in IT since decades. In the last decade, it was the cloud. Everybody moved into the cloud, and you had all your systems then running on AWS or Azure or Google Cloud and so on. And then, of course, if they make a change in the pricing and you build it in a way that you cannot just flip it, then they have all the power. The so-called vendor lock-in, and I can tell you that is real, even if some AWS or GCP partners will tell you otherwise. But it's true. You still can build it in a way that you would be, independent. But if you rely on the serverless stuff and all on the apps you have there and storage and so on, then it's not just a one click to move it out. It would be very painful. And so they have you in their hands, the leverage. And we see this with AI now as well. At least I know there are a lot of different fields where AI is used, and if you now can make a PowerPoint or not, that's probably not mission critical. But I see the adoption for developers where this gets insane in ways of you have 4 tabs open, all these agents running, sub-agents running. They produce so much output that you need agents to review the agent output. So there are already these cycles which lean heavily on the usage of AI. And of course, there is the concern if your whole pipeline depends on building it, reviewing it, having checks in your deployment, and even end-to-end testing and all of this, then if you are locked into a vendor and they decide to double the token costs, then you have real trouble, because this means your margin is gone, and this is mission critical. And so it's the same thing again. And this time, in the cloud, it was more or less a decision how you build it and if you go full vendor lock-in or not. But for these big models, it's not so easy, because you can not just choose another one easily or just run it yourselves easily, because these things are so big and resource intensive. That's why all build these data sources. And there are already more or less 2 streams. So the one is still the cutting edge and state-of-art models which run in the cloud. They are superior to any open weight models and more performant. They have whole data centers running behind it, and there is a reason for it. But on the other hand, you have providers which would really produce open weight models, smaller models, more specialized models, even for consumer hardware to run it on, because there is a movement also between developers or under developers that they want to use this technology, but they don't want the vendor lock-in. So despite, of course, there are regulated environments where you cannot just send the data to any cloud provider anyway. So there is a security thing as well, and data privacy and regulation thing. But also just for developers, they want to use this technology because it's really good, but you don't want to make it dependent on these cloud providers. So that's also why now this Kimi K3 release was quite a loud one, because it's an open weights model, a Chinese open weights model from Alibaba. And it's nearly on the same level as the US foundation models, but it's open weight. So it really means you can download the whole model and run it run it yourself, it's still huge. So if you have some server racks with GPUs lying around, then you can run it yourselves. But there's another thing. This Kimi model is designed in a way that it's also runnable on more CPU heavy workloads, or that it's more CPU heavy. And this is very interesting because it goes a little bit against this trend that you need these clusters of GPUs, and NVIDIA, one of the most successful companies right now, and so on. And these Chinese models, they set a different path now so that you could also run them on CPU hardware more. And that's interesting because there we don't have so much bottlenecks right now. And if you even can combine the CPU and GPU thing, then it gets more performant and so on and so forth. So it's a little bit of a different architecture they find, which of course is very dangerous for the big data center bubble, because if you don't need all these GPUs in the scale and so on, then there might burst the bubble, of course.
And then David, because also even me, like these things are hard to keep up with. Even when we work on them day to day, I think for someone that's running a business or making decisions around, like if I'm the chief operating officer or a CEO of a company, or we also talk to CTOs and CIOs. It's like if we're in those positions and we're attempting to make certain decisions, I think you talked about these really heavy, big models, and then models that are more specific. So oftentimes, I think I hear you recommend for people to use dumber models or less powerful models. And can you talk a little bit about that in terms of what you're speaking about now? Because what's the benefit of that?
Yeah. When you have a hammer, everything looks like a nail. That's an old saying. And so companies and teams tend now to throw LLMs at everything, which is not necessary. So don't use LLM where code is still the better solution, since it's way more resource efficient. And also, if you think about the environment and the planet, you should probably not fire up a gazillion billion parameters in a data center. If a small regex does the trick, you cannot even measure the electricity it needs. So this is the one thing. So not just throw LLMs at everything. The next thing is, it's not so hard to prevent vendor lock-in right now. It is because there is such a fierce competition between these providers that they kind of already normalized a little bit in the way this model works, because nobody wants to refactor its all code just to use a model from someone else. So these specifications are already there are still differences, minor differences, and you need to tweak it and so on and so forth. But the big picture is, so they all work more or less the same on interface level, API level. So you can build the software or your solutions or your automations in a way that you are model agnostic to a certain degree. And you should absolutely do this, because this means that you have all the power. When changing the provider is just 2 lines of code or a click, then of course you can leverage your power and say, okay, you double the cost, goodbye. And the customers will go away. And so without a vendor lock-in, it's very hard to blackmail you in a higher tier. And so to stay vendor agnostic is absolutely the way to go. And even these open weight models, where I'm very hopeful that we see more of them, and that you really can run them in the not too distant future for even mission critical tasks. And they work the same way usually. You can set them up so that they are compatible, and then it's just the URL switch to your local environment, and you run your own model to the GPU provider where you host it. And this is absolutely the way to go. So always be sure to avoid vendor lock-in now more than ever, because it's so fast, this whole development. And right now the models are subsidized, means you get a lot for the money you pay them. So because they want to gain the market, they fight for dominance, and they have so much capital, all of them. Google fighting against Amazon, fighting against Anthropic, fighting against OpenAI, and the Chinese models. So they burn money, and you can leverage this right now. So if it's fine, then you should use these capabilities to build up as much as you can until the party is over. And when the party is over, you better have an alternative plan. That's kind of.
Yeah, it's super helpful. And when you talk about too, we have, just to kind of end here, I think maybe my last question is, keeping vendor agnostic, like you have all these base models that people know of, like, like we talked about, like Gemini or Azure or these kind of things. But then, so how can you create a system that becomes vendor agnostic? What framing, what framework do you need to then be able to switch things out like that and not be locked in?
Yeah, so right now we're talking a lot about harnesses. So if we talk about AI agents and not only the large language model API call, because that's just another API and then it's a switch. But if you have a more elaborate agent, then you have a harness around this agent, which means that's the tools the agent used, the knowledge it has, and all of this stuff. And you should really try to have this vendor agnostic again, so that you can just switch the large language model in your harness, or when you have agentic workflows, that you probably should not build them in the nice and simple UI you have there. So you can build it in Anthropic, you can go to MS Copilot and build workflows there, and it's just some clicks. But these clicks mean that they are in the environment and they don't belong you. If they double the price, then all your agents and all the stuff is locked in. But if you build them with frameworks like we do, for example, I love right now Pydantic AI. Pydantic is such a broad used library in the whole Python ecosystem. Every big large language model provider has Pydantic for structured output validation and so on. They have made a framework in code which lets you build AI agents with all the bells and whistles and everything you need. And the large language model is still just a setting in your config, kind of. So you can swap this easily. They do the abstraction, which also means different models have some different chat formats or tool use, and all of this stuff is handled by this framework, but it keeps it agnostic. It's not only Pydantic AI. Of course, there are a lot of frameworks already out there, but I love Pydantic AI very much because Python was always my choice for backends, and they have Logfire for observability. So there's a whole suite you can have to run your agents: professional, observable, and vendor agnostic. And Pydantic AI is not a vendor, it's an open source framework.
I think also to kind of wrap up here, I think from what would be important for people to know is basically, if you're dangerous enough to start building workflows, like we talk to a lot of people that are building workflows with AI in certain ways, and they're using nice systems that make it easy, that are low code or no code or things like that, which is great, and it gets them to a certain point. And now a lot of times we're having people reach out to us and ask us how we can help them to turn this thing that they built into a system that has stabilized pricing. And in some cases that might be thousands of dollars that then can stabilize to maybe a few hundred. I know you like Pydantic a lot. That's not a secret. I think what I always see is there's kind of like this barrier to entry. And so if people have any questions about this or about, are things that you might want to know, please feel free to leave questions in the comment section. We'll try our best to answer them. And I think for now, we've covered quite a lot in our short time, and hopefully you have a good understanding of how to maintain some of your costs. And David, thanks so much again.
Yeah. Thank you for having me. And see you next week again.
All right.